Hey guys, today we are evaluating expressions with variables. So remember that an expression is a group of terms and each one of them uses order of operations. Okay, so we are going to evaluate. What does it mean when we evaluate? It means we calculate the value. Basically, you're going to find the answer. And it needs to be a numerical answer in this case. So when we substitute, we replace variables with numbers. I want both of these definitions written down in your notebook or on a piece of loose leaf paper in your notes. So make sure you have that. Okay, so when we look at an equation like this one, it has an equal sign. A term represents these numbers. In this case, this term has a coefficient and a variable. That means when we say coefficient, it's the number that you multiply by the variable. If we just have a single variable, we also call that a term. And if we just have an integer or a rational number, we also call that a term. Okay, so don't forget that when we multiply, that there are other ways to show multiplication than just a multiplication sign. Because a lot of times multiplication signs get confused with the variable letter x. So we can use a dot, we can use parentheses, or we can just use a coefficient and variable next to one another with no gap. Okay, so these are all the ways that we can now show multiplication in algebra. All right, so what does this all mean? If we have a question like this where they ask us to evaluate the following expression and what they want us to do is plug in 25 for b. So write this one down, 16 plus b. My first step is going to be to substitute the b for 25. So I put it in parentheses, 16 plus parentheses 25. The reason why I put parentheses around it is so that way I remember that this was the thing that I plugged in for b. Now we can just straight up add. 16 plus 25 gives us 41. Okay, so sometimes they might ask us to evaluate the expression and they give us two pieces to plug in. In this case, we're taking x minus y. So they want us to plug in 64 for x and 27 for y. When we do that, we can just then subtract, and 64 minus 27 is 37. Okay, what if we have a coefficient and variable? Well, that means, like we said in the previous slide, multiplication. So 5 times t plus 4. We are substituting 3 for t so we can evaluate. So 5 times 3, put the 3 in parentheses, plus 4. 5 times 3, it gives us 15, because remember, order of operations tells us to multiply first and then add. 15 plus 4 gives us 19. So why do I have to put it in parentheses? Well, if I just write it in like this, what does that look like? It looks like a 53, which we know is not what we are doing. We want to multiply. So that's why it's important to always use that parentheses. Please star that and put use parentheses. Okay, so you go ahead and try these and I'll be back in just a second to show you what I did. Alright, the first step for each one of these is to substitute D for 12 and E for 2 and put them in parentheses. So I'm going to show you that for each of these. Okay, so notice for each one of these I left the variable out, but I substituted parentheses first. Okay, so in this one, I'm using D and I'm putting in a 12 for D. On this one, I'm substituting D for 12 here, but my E is a positive 2. Okay, 9 times 2 goes in the parentheses and then I square it. Okay, so now I'm ready to solve these. Grab your red pen in case you didn't do this step and go ahead and write that step out. Alright, so now we can follow order of operations, which tells me to multiply first and I get 24, bring down my minus 5. 24 minus 5 is 19 and I'm done. Over here we need to multiply first before we subtract or multiply this one. So 5 times 2 is 10 minus 3 times 12. Before we can subtract, we need to multiply these. So we get 10 minus 36. Now this is going to give us something that we haven't really talked about a whole lot, because when you subtract a bigger number, it's going to end up being negative. So in your calculator, put 10 minus 36, and you will see that you get a negative 26. Now don't worry, you will not have one like this on the test. Okay, but it really is a negative number. Over here, do we multiply first or do we evaluate expressions? Or exponents. 2 squared always happens first, and 2 times itself 2 times gives me 4. Okay, so now we have 9 times 4, which gives us 36. Okay, now let's look at a real world problem. When would we actually use these types of things? Well, we use them all the time in geometry. So in this one, Mrs. Branson is putting in a rectangular pool in her backyard. The length is 20 feet, and the width is 15 feet. What will be the total area of the pool? So this is our question. That's why we underline it and we circle the key information. Use the formula area equals length times width to determine the total area. So we know area equals length times width. This is the area formula for any rectangle, square, anything that's a rectangular prism. So I know the length is 20 feet. So I put my parentheses in for my L and I put 20. And then my width is 15 feet. So 15. And we can also put feet behind them. So my area is 20 times 15. So when I plug it in my calculator, I get 300. Now it's not just 300 feet, it's 300 square feet. So I put feet with a square. The reason why this works is because a foot times a foot is a foot squared. Just like if we had 5 times 5, we could say it's 5 squared. So that's why we square the feet as well. So when we're looking at area, it's always in square feet or square units. Okay, let's try one more. This time you try it. Mr. Petruska is making a rectangular putting green. The length is 16 feet and the width is 4 feet. What will be the total area of the putting green? So we know it's a rectangle and we know we want to find the total area, so we can use the area formula length times width. Go ahead and write the formula and substitute the length and the width for me. And I'll be back in just a second to show you what I did. Okay, so area equals, put your parentheses, and in for the length, we're going to do 16. In for the width, we do 4. And 16 times 4 is 64, and we do feet squared. And that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next time.